Hey, don't judge me. How many times have you heard that? It seems like as human beings, we're afraid of being judged by the people around us. That's why we dress in fashion and do our best to look presentable in whatever culture we're in. It's because deep down we know about the skeletons in our closet. And we're afraid that if someone ever takes a peek inside, they won't accept us. You see, judging other people is really hard because we only get to see snapshots of their life. Let's talk about Andrew Jackson. As a young boy during the Revolutionary War, a British soldier told the young man to clean his boots. And Jackson at the time was still a child, and he refused to do it. He wasn't old enough to be a soldier to fight the British, but he for sure wasn't going to clean an arrogant British officer's boots. And the British officer was so angry, he raised his saber and brought it down on Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson raised his hand up and it cut him. If we just had that story, we'd say, wow, Andrew Jackson, what an amazing person. He was so brave at such a young age. Or maybe we'd hear a story about a duel he fought to defend the honor of his wife, where slyly he put on a much larger coat than he should have worn. And so when the other guy took the first shot, it only wounded him and didn't kill him. And then coolly Jackson looked down the barrel of his pistol and killed the man who had attacked his wife's honor. Now, we might look at that story and say, whoa, this guy stood up for his wife. He was brave and smart. But what about the Trail of Tears? What about when the Supreme Court said that Jackson kicking the Cherokees off their land in Georgia and Tennessee was illegal? And Jackson said, all right, that's what he said. Let's see if he can enforce it. And he took the Indians off the land anyway. We could look at that story and say, Jackson, such a terrible person. He didn't respect the American government's form of separation of powers, and he for sure didn't respect the Indians. Or what if we look at his presidency and see that his election was the first time that the common American man was allowed to vote? And while we don't see people of color voting or women voting, it was a huge step going from landed aristocracy voting to just more normal, regular people. Like, if I was alive during that time, I could have voted for the first time for Andrew Jackson. And we could look at that and say, wow, he was a man of the people. He was one of the first presidents who was elected by average Joe and Bob on the street. Or we could look at his time in the White House with the scandals of his cabinet and how he allowed the petty squabbles of his people to really mess up the way the government was supposed to work. And we could say, oh, he was a terrible leader. Look at how he didn't control his people. He didn't surround himself with good people. Or we could look at the fact that after his wife died, every day Andrew Jackson was home, he went out to her grave. And he would talk to her and share his heart. And we could look at Andrew Jackson and say, man, that guy knew how to love. And in our society of quick divorces and affairs and where it's so hard to find a strong man who's actually faithful to his family, we could look at Andrew Jackson and say, man, he is the epitome of purity. Look at him, how devoted he was to his wife. Even after she died, he never strayed. What a faithful, honorable man. You see, it's so hard to judge another human being because we can look at Andrew Jackson and say he was a villain. Or we could look at him and say he was a hero. It's crazy. Just a couple days ago, somebody snuck into the Hermitage and sprayed obscenities and signs of anarchy all over Rachel and Andrew Jackson's tomb. Now, I'm sure that the people who did this believed that they were trying to do the right thing and trying to stick it to a slaveholder and a man who kicked the Indians off their land. And they said, we don't need to honor this racist, bigot, awful person. But the people who did that didn't know Andrew Jackson. They for sure didn't understand the time Andrew Jackson lived in. And while defacing property and vandalism is never a solution, Many people in our society believe that's the only way for them to be heard. But it all comes back down to, how do we judge people? And while I have strong opinions about people knocking down statues, someone knocked down a statue of U.S. Grant, who was the president who defeated the KKK. They said he was racist. And I'm like, you guys don't even know history. What's going on here? But what's more important is not how we judge men of the past, but how do we judge the men and the women of today? You see, it's really easy for me to look at the people on the other side of the political spectrum, or those vandals, or people who believe things that I don't believe. It's easy for me to judge them with disdain and say, man, they are trash. They're so stupid. They don't get it. Our society today is deeply divided on how to wear masks. And some people look at people who don't wear masks and say, you guys are so selfish and awful. And other people look at people who wear masks and say, you guys are so manipulated and dumb. And both sides are just arguing against each other. And this is happening in church. You know, the Bible says, don't judge, lest you be judged. Jesus says, the measure that you use to judge other people will be flipped around on you. You see, some of the greatest people in history, people that we still admire and love today, people like Mr. Rogers or Mother Teresa, when they met a person, they judged them as worthy of their love and of their time and attention. And when they judged the world with that huge standard of love, the world turned around and judged them back as worthy of love and time and attention. You see, the Bible tells us not to judge other people as good or bad, because we've all had bad days. If you see me at a moment of greatness where I'm just shining for God, you might judge me and say, he's amazing, man, that guy's got it all together. But if you could see me sometimes on my dark days when I'm messed up and lose my temper or fall into sin or just have an awful, awful time, you could look at me and say, wow, he's awful. No one should ever listen to him. He's a sinner. But God knows our hearts. He knows what we're struggling with. He knows our desires. We just see what comes out. And so today, whether you like Andrew Jackson or don't, that doesn't matter. But what does matter is how you look at the people in your life. You see, Jesus was being crucified, and he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Now, I know that you're right on everything. But can you look at the Democrats or the Republicans or the vandals, or the Confederate flag wavers and say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And look past their opinions and their actions that you don't like and see a child of God. And say, this person needs love and acceptance. And what's more important than me winning this political or religious or social argument is for me to love my enemies. You know, the only way America's going to pull out of this, the only way our families, our churches, our communities can pull out of this is if we stop focusing on everything that divides us and start saying, you know what? I love you. Let me listen to you and understand where you're coming from. And we might not be able to change someone else's mind, but you know what? That's not our job. Jesus didn't say, change one another's mind. He said, here's a new commandment I give you. Love one another. And when we see Andrew Jackson and his unloving attitudes toward the Indians, toward his slaves, toward the people who disagreed with him, it's repulsive. But when we see Andrew Jackson's heroic behavior, defending his wife's honor, going to her grave, how he loved his friends and adopted an Indian boy and raised him as his own, when we see his actions of love, we admire it. So today, instead of focusing on everyone else and how good they are, how bad they are, take a deep look inside and decide, you know what? I'm going to love today. I'm going to love my family. I'm gonna love my enemies. I'm gonna love dumb people. I'm just gonna love. And when you make that decision, you will find peace that this world is desperately searching for. God bless.